Brigadier General Robert Travis watched through his B-17's windscreen as his entire formation began to disintegrate. 30 German fighters, maybe more, came diving from every angle. A swarm of interceptors started picking off defenseless bombers left and right. This run was meant to soften the defenses before D-Day, but the weather had betrayed them, scattering their escort. Suddenly, a single Mustang appeared from out of the clouds. The general's heart sank. It wasn't enough to save them. But the fighter did not flee. It attacked, head-on. Travis couldn't believe his eyes. As he described, quote, "It was a case of one lone American against what seemed to be the entire Luftwaffe." James Howard didn't choose adventure. He was seized by it. Born April 8, 1913, in Canton, China, he grew up in the thick of cultural friction and colonial ambition. His father, an American ophthalmologist, had crossed the Pacific to teach eye surgery in a city alive with trade, tension, and change. At 11, Howard's life swerved into terror. Manchurian bandits stormed the region and abducted both him and his father, spiriting them away into lawless hills. For 10 weeks, they lived as hostages, watched, threatened, and marched through rough country with no guarantee of survival. But they escaped. The details were never fully told, but the impact was permanent. The boy who made it out had learned how to stay calm when no one else could. The family returned to St. Louis in 1927. He had planned to become a doctor like his father, but something about flying, its risk, its control, its promise of mastery, stirred a different hunger. In late 1937, Howard applied to the U.S. Navy's flight training program, one of the most competitive paths a young man could take. He passed written exams covering math, physics, and navigation, then endured a battery of physical tests, including vision, reflexes, and coordination. Out of 140 applicants, only 15 were accepted. Howard was among them. By January 1938, he was at Naval Air Station Pensacola, learning the trade in open cockpit trainers. He earned his wings in 1939 and received his first assignment flying Grumman F-3 F-2 biplane fighters off USS Enterprise, based at Pearl Harbor. The F-3 F-2 was the Navy's last biplane fighter. Tough, underpowered, and built like a barrel with wings. With a 950 horsepower radial engine and a top speed barely over 250 miles per hour, it was already obsolete by European standards. But it could climb fast, roll tight, and absorb punishment. It taught Howard discipline, patience, and how to navigate in 3 dimensions with no help from technology. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, storm clouds thickened. By June 1941, James Howard had made a decision that seemed insane to most Navy pilots. He resigned his commission and signed up for something far more dangerous, the American Volunteer Group, the legendary Flying Tigers, operating in Burma under Claire-Lee Chennault, the outspoken tactician famous for predicting Japan's air power threat when few in Washington would listen. For Howard, the decision felt natural. China was his second home. While other pilots saw the ABG as a risky adventure, Howard saw it as defending a country he genuinely loved. The Flying Tigers flew Curtiss Wright P-40 Warhawks. The P-40 was a brute, tough, unforgiving, and full of contradictions. Its Allison V-1710 engine gave it solid power, and its .650 caliber machine guns hit hard. But it couldn't climb with the nimble Japanese fighters or hold its own at high altitude. What it could do was dive like a falling anvil and shrug off hits that would tear other aircraft apart. Pilots who knew how to handle it turned its flaws into weapons and lived to tell about it. Howard joined the 2nd Squadron, the Panda Bears, and quickly caught Chennault's attention. The legendary commander had developed innovative tactics to maximize the P-40's strengths while minimizing weaknesses. Instead of dogfighting with more agile Japanese aircraft, Flying Tigers used hit-and-run tactics, diving from altitude to attack, then using superior speed to escape. Howard's climb from pilot to squadron commander to group ops officer wasn't politics. It was pure skill, sharp instincts, and total control in the air. The real test came on January 3, 1942, when Howard participated in a daring attack on Japanese-held Tak Airfield in Thailand. The mission called for low-level strafing, one of aviation's most dangerous assignments. Diving his P-40 toward the airfield, Howard spotted 3 Nakajima Ki-27s parked in neat rows. The Ki-27 was Japan's primary army fighter, lightweight and highly maneuverable, able to outclimb and outturn most Allied aircraft. But on the ground, it was just aluminum and gasoline waiting to burn. Howard dropped in low, throttle wide, lining up 3 parked Ki-27s. He opened fire. 50 caliber rounds tore into the first, shredding it in flame. He raked the second and third, rupturing fuel tanks and shattering canopies. All 3 lit up instantly. Then the ground erupted. Tracers streaked past as Japanese anti-aircraft gunners opened up. A shell slammed into his wing root, jolting the P-40. Controls stiffened. Howard pulled up, climbed hard, and turned south. The Warhawk shook the whole way back, but it held. More victories followed rapidly. Howard shared credit for a Mitsubishi Ki-21 bomber on January 19th, scored solo against another Ki-27 over Rangoon on January 24th, then brought down his final Ki-27 over Hengyang on July 4th, 1942, the Flying Tiger's last combat action. With 6 victories in 56 missions, James Howard had achieved ace status, which he cheekily described in his autobiography as, quote, an arbitrary title, which is supposed to distinguish a fighter pilot who has achieved a high level of success. In late 1942, the Navy offered Howard a return to service, but an encounter with an officious base commander who brushed him off made it clear he was no longer one of their own. Within days, Howard made the break official, trading his Navy wings for a captain's commission in the U.S. Army Air Forces. His stateside assignments involved flying 2 very different fighters defending the West Coast, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning and Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The P-38 Lightning looked like it came from the future. Twin booms, central nacelle, tricycle landing gear. Powered by 2 Allison V-1750 engines, it promised exceptional performance, but promises weren't always kept. James Howard, recalling his experiences with the P-38, said, quote, there were so many problems with the P-38. It was cynically called the engineer's dream, as opposed to a pilot's dream. The Lightning's complexity worked against it. Twin engines required perfect synchronization. Turbo superchargers were temperamental, and unique handling characteristics demanded constant vigilance. For a pilot accustomed to single-engine fighters' straightforward honesty, the P-38 felt like flying a committee decision. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was entirely different. Massive, powerful, built like a flying tank. Howard was much happier flying the Jug, appreciating its rugged construction and heavy firepower. But the P-47 had one critical flaw: limited range. It couldn't stay with the bombers deep into Germany, leaving them exposed just when they needed cover most. As Howard later summed up the problem with brutal clarity, quote, all the German fighters had to do was wait until the last escort fighters turned back and then pounce on the bombers. The results were devastating. Missions like Schweinfurt and Regensburg cost the 8th Air Force dozens of heavy bombers. Something had to change. In 1943, Howard received a promotion to major and orders that would change his life. Command at the 356th Fighter Squadron, 354th Fighter Group in England. More importantly, his unit would be among the first to fly the aircraft that would revolutionize European air warfare. The North American P-51B Mustang was everything Howard had hoped to find. He boasted that, quote, all the advanced rumors of the P-51's excellence proved true. It was a fighter pilot's dream. The Mustang's secret lay in its power plant, the Packard V1650, a license-built Rolls-Royce Merlin 6366. This liquid-cooled V12 produced 1,380 to 1,490 horsepower, driving a 4-bladed Hamilton Standard propeller that efficiently converted power into thrust. At 32 feet long, with a 37-foot wingspan, the Mustang matched other single-engine fighters in size. But its 6,985-pound empty weight and 11,800-pound maximum gross weight reflected fuel capacity and structural strength necessary for long-range missions. Performance was equally impressive. The P-51B cruised at 362 miles per hour, while achieving 439 miles per hour maximum at 25,000 feet. service ceiling of 41,900 feet meant it could climb above most enemy aircraft. A combat range of 755 miles with internal fuel, extending over 880 miles with drop tanks, finally gave bomber crews desperately needed protection. Armament consisted of 4 wing-mounted 50 caliber Browning machine guns with 350 rounds per inboard gun, 280 per outboard. This provided devastating firepower while maintaining balance and handling. Howard personalized his Mustang with Ding Hao painted on the nose, Mandarin for very good, along with his ABG victory marks. The aircraft became an extension of his personality, combining Chinese heritage with American fighting spirit. James Howard ultimately summed up the advantage of the aircraft, saying, quote, "The only limitation of the P-51, if you could call it one, was the pilot. But in Europe, surviving the air war demanded more than flying skill. It required new combat tactics. Freewheeling individualism that served flying tigers in China wouldn't work over Germany, where Luftwaffe pilots flew disciplined formations with home field advantage." Knowing this, James Howard drilled into his co-pilots the lesson that, quote, "If you're out hound-dogging it alone, you're asking for it, because the formation of Me-109s who've spotted you from above will certainly make mincemeat of you." The 354th trained hard to counter Luftwaffe tactics, mastering the art of climbing to 22,000 feet, linking up with bomber streams, and holding tight formation across enemy territory. That meant burning fuel efficiently, navigating with precision, and flying wingtip to wingtip for hours in sub-zero air. Escorts had to stay close, far enough to maneuver, close enough to deter. During a Bremen escort mission on December 20th, 1943, he went head-to-head with the Messerschmitt Bf-109, the backbone of German defenses, and one of history's most successful fighters. The angular, aggressive Me-109 had earned its reputation through years of combat over Spain, Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. Using the Mustang's superior high-altitude performance and his combat-seasoned instincts, Howard climbed hard into the sun, rolled inverted, and dove onto the German fighter's rear. Closing fast, he steadied the gun sight and squeezed the trigger. A burst of 50 caliber fire ripped into the enemy aircraft. Flames burst from the engine cowling as the fighter spun out and plunged toward the fields below. Howard's first victory in Europe, far from his last. January 11th, 1944, dawned cold and gray over England. Weather conditions should have grounded every aircraft, but the strategic bombing campaign couldn't wait. Operation Argument was breathtaking in scale. 525 B-17 Flying Fortresses and 138 B-24 Liberators dispatched to strike aviation targets near Oschersleben and Halberstadt. Primary objectives were Messerschmitt Bf-110 production plants and Junkers facilities manufacturing Ju-88 wings. Success would cripple German fighter production months before D-Day. Mission planners knew the cost would be high. German radar was sophisticated, and the Luftwaffe had been hoarding fighters for exactly this defense. Intelligence suggested 500 German fighters might rise to meet the bombers. The escort plan was complex. P-47 Thunderbolts providing initial cover, P-51 Mustangs, including Howard's, over the target area, fresh P-47s for the return. But like many complex plans, this one began falling apart immediately. Deteriorating weather led to recall orders for some P-47 units, creating gaps that German controllers quickly exploited. Major Howard led the 356 P-51s toward their rendezvous, knowing the mission had become far more dangerous. German radar had acquired the bomber streams, and Luftwaffe airfields across northwestern Germany were launching every available fighter. In Howard's own words, quote, "As we reached the bomber stream, I discovered it was under intense attack by dozens of enemy fighters." What had launched from England in tight, practiced formation was now breaking apart into scattered dogfights stretched across miles. B-17 Flying Fortresses lumbered forward, their 4 engines straining to hold formation as gunners swung frantically from turret to turret, searching for shadows diving in from above. German fighters came in waves, tight, fast, ruthless, hitting from every angle, using tactics honed by years of war. Howard saw it unfolding in an instant. Holding his full squadron together would be useless. Instead, he snapped into action, dispatching 2 of his squadron leaders to guard the middle and rear groups, while he surged ahead toward the most exposed target, the lead bombers. Up front, The navigators and bombardiers, vital to the mission's success, were nearly defenseless. The sight was gut-wrenching. Dozens of B-17s, each packed with 10 men flying into the heart of Germany, were under siege. Built to take hits and keep flying, they were now slow-moving giants caught in a storm of cannon fire and tracer rounds, with nowhere to run and no place to hide. With no time to hesitate, Howard dove in, eyes locked on the most immediate threat. His first engagement came immediately. A Messerschmitt Bf-110 destroyer, a twin-engine heavy fighter designed specifically to attack bombers, was moving directly toward the lead B-17s, positioning for a frontal attack. The Bf-110 was larger and more heavily armed than single-engine fighters, but less maneuverable. Its twin engines provided redundancy and firepower, while its two-man crew allowed better situational awareness. Against bombers, it was devastatingly effective. Against a skilled single-engine pilot, however, it was far from invincible. Howard recalled how he, quote, waited until his wingspan filled my gun sight and opened up with a 4-second burst. Concentrated .50 caliber fire struck the Bf-110 with surgical precision. Smoke poured immediately, and Howard watched it enter a diving spiral, wings separating under uncontrolled flight stress. But victory came with a price. The attack had separated Howard from his formation. When he looked for his wingman, he discovered he was alone. The swirling battle had scattered aircraft across miles of sky. Most pilots would have immediately climbed away, seeking to rejoin friendly forces. Howard made a different choice. Climbing back toward the battered bombers, Howard's eyes caught a staggering sight. No handful, no squadron, but over 30 German fighters swarming in from every direction. The air tore with tracer fire and explosions as the B-17 crews fought for survival against a brutal, overwhelming assault. A fellow fighter pilot put it simply, quote, an attack by a single fighter on 4 or 5 times his own number wasn't uncommon, but a deliberate attack by a single fighter against 30-plus enemy fighters without tactical advantage of height or surprise is rare, almost to the point of extinction. That stark reality didn't slow Howard. He locked on to an Me-109 weaving through the bomber stream and fired a precise burst that tore through its wing, forcing it into a spiraling dive. As he pulled up sharply, a Focke-Wulf FW-190 came screaming across his path, guns blazing. Howard pressed the attack relentlessly, watching smoke billow from its engine until the pilot slammed open the canopy, climbed out, and bailed, fighting the slipstream before the chute snapped open and carried him away. But then, as Howard recalled, quote, it wasn't long before I saw another Me-109 tooling up behind the formation, and then another, and another, and another. Each clash was a zero-sum duel. Me-109s dove from above, gaining speed to strike the bomber's vulnerable undersides. Howard anticipated their moves, cutting into their dive paths, forcing them to break off or fight in tight turns, where his Mustang's superior agility gave him the edge. With every intercepted attack, he chipped away at the swarm, closing in on the bombers. The relentless combat pace took its toll. 3 of Howard's 4 guns jammed due to excessive G-forces during violent maneuvering, leaving only 1 functioning weapon. Fuel supply also became dangerously low. But even with these handicaps, Howard refused to abandon his charges. When direct attack became impossible, he improvised tactics, demonstrating creativity and courage. A twin-engine Junkers Ju-88 approached the formation. The versatile Ju-88 had served the Luftwaffe as bomber, night fighter, reconnaissance platform, and anti-shipping striker. In this configuration, it could engage bombers from ranges, making interception difficult. To deal with the incoming threat, Howard, quote, decided to bluff my way by making feints in their direction to scare them off. His repeated aggressive feints, quick threatening dives, and sharp turns aimed to convince the Ju-88 crew they faced a larger or more dangerous threat, and forced them to abandon their attack runs, opting for caution rather than risk a fight with Howard's Mustang. Howard's solution was pure genius. Without enough ammunition for sustained combat, he used remaining firepower and the Mustang's intimidating presence for psychological warfare. The bomber crews watching this extraordinary display were witnessing aviation history. From their B-17 vantage points, They could see a single P-51 engaging formations of enemy fighters with tactics defying logic and survivor instincts. Brigadier General Robert F. Travis, leader of the bomber formation, said, quote, "He was all over the wing, across it and around it. For sheer determination and guts, it was the greatest exhibition I'd ever seen. It was a case of one lone American against what seemed to be the entire Luftwaffe." For 30 minutes, Howard fought the most extraordinary single-handed aerial battle in history. Using every skill learned in China and every capability of his Mustang, he engaged a force that should have overwhelmed him in seconds. His tactics constantly evolved. When protecting bombers, he throttled back to match their speed, staying close enough to defend, but far enough to avoid defensive gunners. When enemy fighters approached, he gunned his engine and maneuvered aggressively, using the Mustang's superior performance for tactical advantage. The psychological impact was as important as marksmanship. German pilots, expecting helpless bombers with scattered escorts, instead encountered a fighter pilot who seemed everywhere at once, disrupting every attack before it could develop. As the battle gradually subsided and German fighters withdrew to refuel and rearm, Howard found himself alone in skies that had been filled with hundreds of aircraft. The bomber formation continued home from its target, battered but intact, thanks to his unprecedented defense. Howard gathered 3 stray P-51s and led them back to RAF Buxted. Colonel Harold Bowman, 401st Bomb Group commander, remembered that, quote, "When our bomber crews landed, a high-pitched excitement filled the briefing room." James Howard's Mustang bore only a single bullet hole, testimony to incredible luck, superior flying, or divine intervention. Debriefings yielded 16 separate accounts from 401st crews describing the lone P-51's incredible actions. Each story confirmed the impossible. A single fighter pilot had successfully defended an entire bomber formation against overwhelming odds for over 30 minutes. Bowman went on to recall wondering, quote, "Who was that Mustang pilot who took on the German Air Force single-handedly and saved our 401st Bomb Group from disaster?" Gun camera footage provided final confirmation of Howard's identity and achievements. Official tally credited him with 4 victories, but numbers barely told the story. The week following Oschersleben transformed Howard from an accomplished pilot into an international celebrity. A London press conference brought him face-to-face with reporters, including Walter Cronkite and Andy Rooney, who could barely comprehend the scope of his accomplishment. When asked why he risked his life against such odds, Howard's response became legendary, quote, "I've seen my duty, and I've done it." The quote became worldwide headlines, capturing Howard's humility and essential character. Here was a man who accomplished something extraordinary, but saw it simply as doing what needed to be done. The New York Times wrote on January 19, 1944, quote, "Major James H. Howard was identified today as the lone United States fighter pilot who for more than 30 minutes fought off about 30 German fighters." Recognition came swiftly. Howard's promotion to lieutenant colonel arrived in February 1944, followed by the nation's highest honor. On June 5, 1944, one day before D-Day, Lieutenant General Carl Spaatz presented James Howard with the Medal of Honor. Howard became the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive the Medal of Honor during World War II. But his war continued. He returned to combat, flying dozens more missions and helping plan D-Day close air support. His final victories came over Brunswick, another Messerschmitt Bf-110 on January 30, 1944, and a Focke-Wulf 190 on his birthday, April 8th. Promoted to colonel in January 1945, he transferred to the new U.S. Air Force in 1947, became Brigadier General in the Air Force Reserve in 1948, and retired in 1966. His civilian career included managing Lambert Field as St. Louis Director of Aeronautics and founding Howard Research, a systems engineering business sold to Control Data Corporation. In 1991, he published Roar of the Tiger, providing future generations with first-hand insights into crucial air battles. Reflecting on war, he wrote, quote, "War is not a feast of excitement, but a series of cruel episodes that do not always end in glory." In 1994, Pinellas County declared General Howard Day. Permanent exhibits at St. Petersburg Clearwater International Airport and John Burroughs School honor his memory. Howard Avenue in Myrtle Beach bears his name. Howard made his last public appearance on January 27, 1995. He passed away on March 18th of that year at age 81 and was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Major Allison C. Brooks, group leader for the 401st Mission, said he was, quote, a one-man Air Force. An American radio and TV personality, Andy Rooney, called him, quote, the greatest fighter pilot story of World War II.